that's one of those.
It's digital. We'll make it look.
That's one of those cool
Can
little
I get a
JVC
copy
things.
of your videos for the archive?
Oh, I'm sure you would eventually.
Definitely, but in the form of the arrangement. Actually, I have a release form for you. The thing that we're in order to
I'm perfectly up for is the first ISP. You know, there was NSF, there was DARPA, then NSF, then regionals. But the idea of having the net take off for people that weren't DARPA contractors, right? Thinking machines, we were able to get on the DARPA net because we were a DARPA contractor. It was very difficult. It took 6 months of a full-time person to get us on the DARPA net in 1985. And it was hard as hell. But the little garden basically made it so that any old person, and more than that, not just themselves, but the way Ben Franklin always tried to make things that weren't just, you had to go to Ben Franklin, but he made it so that you could go to other people and enabling other people to create their own ISPs. And I don't know, there are 400 ISPs now in the Bay Area, in large part because of the little garden.
The two things that were what was special about the little garden is no restriction of resale, which was just basically verboten. Everybody was concerned, the whole place will crumble, you'll just start reselling it and they'll just max out these connections. And what we wanted to do is originally it was kind of a cooperative. I don't know if you heard that, but what happened is John Romkey and John Gilmore and Steve Crocker actually were pretty much the three original people. And Steve Crocker is Trusted Information Systems. John Romkey, FTP Software, and John Gilmore, you probably know him through Cygnus and EFF and such. And they wanted a connection. And at that point, it was like $2,000 for a connection from Alternet at that point. And in order for them to be able to do kind of like resell, it was going to cost them $5,000. And they said, that's bogus for a T1. So they actually they knew Rick Adams real well and said, hey, listen, can we do this cooperative thing? They said, yeah, sure.
And when was it?
This was 88, 89, around there, probably around 89. And Rick said, yeah, sure, don't let it expand too much. And of course, Gilmore, being Gilmore, said, sure, no problem. Well, at that point, he ran a 56K up to what his house called Toad Hall. And he called me up. I was working with him because I wrote the software that hooks FidoNet up to the internet. And he said, I got this connection. We'd really like to be able to get more people on it. And so I got a copy of what was called KA9Q at that point, which is this kind of TCP/IP software that was written by Phil Karn. And we set up this little 8088, or was it, I think it was a 286 or something like that, and put a couple serial cards in an Ethernet card, and it all ran under MS-DOS, hacked it up so that my machine at home could call into it. I had like another version of KA9Q at home, and so we were able to start selling slip connections, which was something that you really just didn't have we didn't have the hardware or the money to be able to do, so we were making these little boxes out of $400, at the most, to be able to do this stuff. So it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and at that point we said, gee, we really can't manage this on our own. It was supposed to be kind of a cooperative, and not that many people were helping out with the co-op. So we hired a guy named Tom Jennings, who I had known, again, from the Fido days, because I did the FidoNet work. And he had just quit Apple, and he was like pissed off at the corporate world and just didn't want to deal with that whole scene at all. So he said, yeah, this sounds cool. I can just sort of work this tiny little company and make a couple bucks and do my skateboarding and all that other stuff. And we gave him a cut of how much people would do, pay into this thing. I think it was like $10 per person who plugged in. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Like how many people actually had slip accounts then at that point from you guys?
This at Toad Hall, what happened is we outstripped the NOS boxes. We had probably about 6 NOS boxes, each with 4 serial cards into them. So there's about 24 lines that were going into John's place, which got a little messy. The phone company guy and there was a woman as well who came in and said, "Oh yeah, another phone line for Toad Hall," and they got to know us real well, and we had like, punch blocks and telephone lines going through his basement and the whole thing. After that, we graduated to like a Livingston Portmaster, which does about 30, and we far outstripped John's poor little 56K link. So as soon as the next step was co-locating with a company called MFS, Metropolitan Fiber Systems, and where we put in a bunch of our equipment at 444 Market, and then we just moved everybody at Toad Hall over there. And that was kind of the start of the real business. We were actually signing 3-year leases and getting really scared, like, gee, what happens if our company collapses in 6 months? But somehow it did.
Where was Toad Hall? What city?
It was in the Haight-Ashbury district. Yeah, that's where John's place is.
But it's named after a restaurant in Palo Alto.
No, the Little Garden is named after a restaurant in Palo Alto.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, but I mean, the Little Garden is a later incarnation.
No, the Little Garden was kind of the co-op. So what happened is all of our, Steve, John, and I, and everybody else would meet at the Little Garden to sort of talk about how we were going to work on the net and get it going and do what we need to do and things like that. And our last meeting there, we basically took over the whole restaurant. We just showed up, and the people there just went, what are we going to do with all these people? And so we just ended up with all these tables. So we kind of like outstripped the restaurant as well. So, but that was the name of that's what we took it from that.
This is the West Coast way this all worked, right? The East Coast was all very stodgy. You had to have official contracts. And the West Coast, you come out here, and there's the Little Garden that was just taking over the Haight-Ashbury flat to be able to get the internet to everybody. It was just that sort of grassroots thing that the West Coast does beautifully. I think that's why you're seeing the internet happen in the West Coast in terms of the small company infrastructure.
Well, we invented the PC. Why not the?
The internet.
It started as a big stodgy company, and then
No, I mean the homebrew computer club and the
Yeah.
whole, and the
same
community
as-
memory and all this.
Yeah, no. I mean, we, Lee Felden Signs and everybody else, are just involved in this stuff as well. He got his community memory stuff going, and he started using this sort of infrastructure. He didn't use us, but he was using his own sort of little internet infrastructure. Wired Magazine, their first connection was through us.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've talked to them, and they mentioned that at all.
He did
Well,
mention
Brian
it.
Bellendorf.
Huh?
Well, I know.
we were the only game in town. The Little Garden was it.
I knew Will Kreth for a little bit.
Oh, right.
He was telling me about Little Garden. Yeah, it's got it here. This is before they moved. This is an original location. They had this big brick warehouse-like place.
Oh, this is.
for-
They moved actually a couple more times after this. Yeah.
Well, that's-
Yeah, but the
never mind.
brick place. Yeah, they went to us and they had one T1 that went into us, and of course once they put up Hotwired or Wired Magazine or whatever the site was originally called, I can't remember, but it was like just hosing that line. That in IUMA, I don't know if you remember IUMA, they went through ScrewsNet. They connected to ScrewsNet, which was one of our clients, and that was another line that was our two highest usage lines, was IUMA and the Wired Magazine site. And finally, they just kind of outstripped that, and they connected directly into Sprint.
And what dates? Give some landmark dates for something.
Oh, geez.
You moved to the
This
city.
must be around 1990. Actually, we have archived all the history of this.
Than that.
Huh?
The web came later than that in any real sense.
Mhm.
You did a Waze database in your basement.
When was that?
It'd have to be 1991 because the Waze code hadn't been put out until April of '91, and that's when you ported it to a PC.
You know what? My dates may be wrong, yeah, because I'm thinking that we've been doing this for about 4 years now. It's 96 now, so it must have been 91, 92.
Yeah, because Wired started pre-web, and they must have had some interest in the internet at that time, right? I mean, they.
I remember they had some stuff. They had an FTP site and they had Gopher originally. The Wired magazine originally. I don't remember them having a website originally. I remember them moving their stuff.
Well,
to
the
Gopher
web didn't
website.
exist when they started.
Yeah.
It wasn't popular yet.
Yeah.
The web was,
Well, yeah, I mean, the web, sorry, it didn't exist commercially or in
Right.
any,
Mosaic hadn't come out
Yeah.
yet.
well, I mean, even by 92, you could say the web existed, but 91, it's
No, we had like
Gleam and Tim's Eye or some demos or whatever.
you had high telnet and things like that. I remember. Yeah.
Like Telnet.
Fetch. Yeah. Mac TCP. For me, one of the major turning points was Mac TCP. Because that got us out of NCSA Telnet when they did their own TCP. But it allowed you to make applications that would run on the Mac platform. And so it could get you out of just being Unix only. Then you could start to get to windowing. And it was quite a while before the PC had TCP IPs that really were
They had real expensive.
mass usable.
Yeah, they had really expensive stacks like FTP softwares, which were $400 a PC for the stack, and they made their money that way. But and they had a really nice stable stack. Also, it took up a lot of TSR space, and that was something that DOS machines just couldn't handle very well. What was the other thing? There was Waterloo TCP, which was a stack that you could use under MS-DOS. There's Phil Karn's thing, but it was basically not a stack that you could run other things on top of. And then there was Novell's LAN workplace
So
DOS.
is it fair to say that the Little Garden was the first modern ISP that
Yeah.
really helped not only itself to bring lots of users, but also brought hundreds of other companies into. I remember John Doring saying, Brewster, you know, there may be 3 or 4 companies doing this stuff now. This time next year there will be 1,000. I'm like, nah. He was absolutely right, if not low. This was in '92, going from '92 to '93. There was an internet world that the first internet world was very interesting to me, and that the real people were there. One person's comment is, there are more CEOs in this room than anything else. These are CEOs where they didn't have any other employees, right? And the booths almost all looked like science projects. You know, the table with the tablecloth, right? The little stand-up, you know, this is who I am. People that had printed out a business card because they had to name the company before they went there. And it felt what I, heard about the Homebrew Computer Club. And we were one of the more established companies at that point.
This is early ways.
This was early Waze.
Yeah.
But Waze Inc. had already existed, so '93. But the Little Garden was, from my point of view, the first that was trying to bring it outside of the research and big company networks. At that point, all the big high-tech companies had the net, and they were all doing intranets because they were the Unix-based places. But to try to get it out to the wild skateboarders and the like, it took the Little Garden.
Yeah. The companies before that, well, basically around that time, let's see, the MCI, no, Sprint wasn't around at that point. They weren't doing internet. MCI, we were their first customer, and first what's called commercial customer. We got through their government division because we were partially NSF funded up in Portland. We were the company that, well, indirectly actually, RainNet, who was one of our business partners, got South Africa and a bunch of other companies or countries online, and the NSF was sort of funding that to be able to help that happen. So we were able to get sort of like introductions to get connected to MCI. But the companies around there was like the NSF sponsored regionals, which were things like Barnet, not BBN.
SurfNet.
Yeah, there's Surf. I'm trying to think of
Minnesota, and not Minnesota, Michigan.
Oh, NiserNet, a couple others, but and then the only other sort of like commercial net at that point was Alternet or UUNET, and they weren't interested in doing slip connections, or they weren't interested in doing like low speed connections that would be affordable.
The dial-up idea.
Yeah,
The dial-up idea really hadn't really occurred to people.
No, it was kind of an experiment too. And Rick Adams wrote the slip code, on the Berkeley Unix. So you figured, he'd be the one sort of like interested in pushing this. No, Alternet was like, big companies. They want like, the HPs and the Apples to connect.
A lot easier to make a business based on those,
Yeah,
as we've seen.
Yeah, and that's where our profit ended up being.
Yes.
Is in the bigger ones. But we still wanted to make sure that any Tom, Dick, or Harriet could plug in at a reasonable cost into the internet. And our first prices were, the way we set it up is, you would buy the phone line on each end. This way we didn't have to incur the cost and the billing, the handling, and everything like that. And we would charge you $70 a month for a 14.4 connection, which was something that was still a little high. I mean, it's like 2 or 3 times what cable TV costs. But we had a lot of diehards, particularly with people who just couldn't get connected. You don't have these $25 slip accounts, back then. And with our connection, we would give you an 8-bit connection, so you had all these people who were like serious hackers that have like 3 or 4, maybe 10 machines at home, and put that behind that one connection out to the internet, as opposed to today where people just sort of plug in and surf.
Right. Yeah. This was the era when code was distributed on the internet in source code.
Yeah.
When we first started putting out waves, we put it out in source code, not in binaries. The idea of putting out binaries was thought of as corrupt because mostly it was wasting bandwidth. I think mostly there was this club of sysads that their job was to bring things down, compile them, and get them to run.
Well, my issue about binaries is that we didn't know who compiled them and what viruses are in, or what backdoors and such. So you always compile from source, so you can say, I know what went in that code, and I know that so-and-so is not going to screw me over by compiling a binary and me just sort of automatically plugging it into my
So
system.
that was the era. And then Mosaic started distributing code in binary form. The Mac stuff had always been distributed in binary.
Yeah.
But the Unix code not.
In the early
So-
90s, the alt sources news groups were always bountiful and
Yeah.
and full.
Yeah,
And
alt
these
sources
days,
is like
it's like a
that.
desert.
Yes. And the freeware community was alive and well. We put out one message in April of '91, and I wanted to run this as a social experiment in the freeware world. I put out one message to one email list, which was Waze Talk. And about 100 people were on that list at that point, that there's this release, Alpha 1 of Waze. And here's the FTP address, and there are 70 databases in the directory of servers. There's a directory of servers, 70 databases, most of them on a connection machine, some of them at MIT, and you could download this stuff. And I just watched. And that posting was reposted on lots of different groups, and the use just started going chunk. First, the first people were the people that were willing to port, because that was the first thing that had to happen. It ran on Suns, and that was about it. And people ported it to everything. And then people started setting up databases, and they'd send in their registration to be part of the directory of servers, and it just spread in that sort of classic exponential approach. But it was very interesting to see the freeware community just be an alive and a well community of people saying, this is cool. It's based on open stuff. It allows us to do something we've never been able to do before. Go for it. And it just spread. And the freeware community is still alive and well today.
Well, we're seeing it in things like Linux and such.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
the freeware community's gone corporate in that respect, I guess.
Some
It's gotten
parts of it,
big.
you have
It's
like
gotten third-party.
you have Cygnus and such that are huge companies now. They were just tiny little companies that are supporting just free software
Freeware's
packages.
gone professional.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yes.
But it's a really needed thing because they have such great tools like GCC. It's like one of the best compilers out there, and you need something to support it. And unfortunately,
But wasn't that the whole idea of the free software? I mean, Richard Stallman's thing, that the money to be made is from support, not from the code, right?
That was,
I mean, that's fulfilling exactly what.
and that's what Gilmer actually did is create a company called Cygnus and actually is making money off of that right now, is supporting that. But he's supporting things like people like NASA and and Sun and various other folks. And also, what's interesting is he's doing all these really, the company is doing all these interesting little hacks, and every time there's a new microprocessor comes out, that company needs a C compiler immediately. And the best thing out there is GCC because it cross-compiles so well, and there's not all the licensing that's involved in being able to get that to go. But yeah, I remember probably soon after that, I probably contacted you, and we ported Waze to System 5.
Oh, this is great. My first meeting with Tim, of course, you know, in the sort of West Coast way, you don't have a meeting in a meeting room. We had a meeting in a place called the Right Spot, which was in south of Market, which is this little divey diner, and it was completely great. And then Tim came in and put this thing down on the desk, and it was this telephone. I said, "Oh, a cell phone?" He said, "No, it's a radio phone." And it's just, ooh, this guy hacks radio. And he said, "Well, I've got this connection in. They don't bill me to be able. You want to dial anywhere in the world?" And it was a ham radio set that you could dial that patched into Pac Bell, and this was a different kind of guy. I then got into his car, and you know, where normally the people just have a stereo, nah, radio. And so there's all the ham radio sets to be able to tie into lots of different networks. Went over to his house, and he said, "Shh, quiet." And we went down to his basement in a place that he doesn't live anymore. Said, "This is a bootleg radio station. I know all of the people that are where the different trucks are that go and track radio stations." And he knew the frequency to use such that there was a hill in between him, so he didn't actually interrupt the frequency of a real radio station, but it was a pirate radio station that broadcast at extremely high wattage. And then he said, "Oh, and here's the PC running the Waze servers for the emergency broadcast system, right? Because you need to be able to get information to lots and lots of people if there's an earthquake." And all that was done through voice over radio, but that doesn't make any sense. So he had a feed of it going into a Waze server that could be accessed over the internet. Of course, over a Telebit Trailblazer going to a phone line to the little garden. And it was getting hits all the time. And that was FidoNet. And so this was the sort of theory and livingness that happened in San Francisco. When a new technology, they didn't just go and say, "Oh, that's the DoD, it's horrible." But the San Francisco community, just as it did with PCs, went and said, "This is something that we could use for the people," and went and did amazing things. So where things were done with radio, and Tim was instrumental in building a lot of radio stations, is now done on the internet, where that's the mechanism to get at large numbers of people. And if you're a small-scale producer and you want to put something out, it's the internet. And that's, I found that very much inspiring after coming out of, more or less the DARPA world.
Yeah,
And MIT and
MIT.
that's great. I'm glad you remembered that stuff. It prompts good memories. I forgot about that Telebit Trailblazer. We scammed so much equipment out of Telebit.
They were the mechanism of wiring up the third world. The PeaceNet is here in the Presidio. Mitra, my
they've
roommate,
moved
did
then.
GreenNet.
They've moved.
Yeah. You know Mitra?
I met him a few times.
Yeah.
PeaceNet moved.
He started GreenNet.
Wait, PeaceNet? Well, PeaceNet used to be down in Palo Alto, and actually he and
Marc
actually it was Marc Graham who started PeaceNet.
Yes.
That's right. Mitra came in because he was in GreenNet in Europe or in England,
In England.
and
This is all pre-internet stuff.
right.
Because a friend of mine works at PeaceNet, and I've been down to some site south of Market. So,
Well, it's actually over here. It's in the Presidio. PeaceNet's or IGC, whatever it is.
You're going to see the Presidio just turn into a think tank of creative high tech. This is going to be a university type atmosphere among people in their 20s and 30s. You're going to just see amazing things flower here. Because we've got this place, we've got we've got a campus atmosphere in San Francisco.
Where do I sign up?
Right now it's fairly difficult, not easy. And so, yeah, we can probably get you scale very well. As is. So what does the workstation do, right? We really wanted to separate out and use the PCs for what they're good for. The web never has, right? It's used it basically as a dumb terminal. And we're seeing them incarnated in hardware. It's just sort of odd. So the workstations, Dynamic folders find information for the user. The idea is dynamic folders are things that find information and put them on your machine for you. Important, right? The web really doesn't work for a lot of users because you have to search for it, and that's just not mainstream. Using information servers, so that how does it do it? Different interface possibilities. You could use newspaper format, email format, geographically, books on a shelf. There are a bunch of different ideas on user interface motifs. The Netscape has no metaphor.
Sure they do. They have the metaphor of an old telecom program.
There it is. Advantage in remote versus local filtering, right? Do you want to do it locally or do you want to do it remotely? What balance do you need between those two? The web doesn't have that stuff. Local caching of documents. How do you go about doing that such that it's robust? The web wasn't really designed for caching in mind. We've run into some problems. Time to live things, that kind of thing. Local scoring of competing servers. If your computer goes and contacts several, then how are you going to know what your user should see? Budgeting the user's time and his money. The server's role. Probing information servers. Examples of information servers. File serving printers, faxes, bulletin board services, da-da-da-da-da. Newspapers, movies, bulletin boards, archive searching, banking services, you know, all the stuff that you'd kind of imagine we've seen now. And pizza ordering, everybody really liked it. You could be, that was sort of, yeah, we want to do pizza ordering, right? Because there's a bunch of geeks at the original. But there are library catalogs and, you know, all the things that you'd be able to do. And that aren't basically there now. Navigating through the directory of servers. So what is the role of the directory of servers? Which I still think is an extremely important role. How do you find resources? What's the metadata behind them? And we're trying to put some of that together through the archive. Servers that rate other servers.
Wait, speaking of, has one of the gaps that I would see is, okay, the internet, which is the name service for, doesn't make any attempt to categorize. That's the
No.
logical place to collect the information.
But it went public too soon.
They take all sorts of information on who you are and what your company name is, nothing about what you do.
No, it's a crime. It's a crime. I mean, you know.
Well, all you have to do is get them to say, add this little thing to your template next
No,
year.
it takes really driving it and making it part of the infrastructure. We've basically got a very thin piece of infrastructure out there. Yeah, well, you know, there's time. So role of editors, right? How do you use both human editors and computer editors, right? That's the wave that will happen. Then markets versus hierarchies, using Silicon Valley. So the idea of what do you use Silicon Valley for? And so that's why, you know, basically the things that have come about, you know, work really well here that they don't work in Europe or on the East Coast. So how would you go about using Silicon Valley? How server companies can make money? The protocols role. So here's why do you need a protocol? And then there are different pieces. Why open protocols promotes wider acceptance, da-da-da-da-da. Hardware independence, protecting the user's privacy, and concluding in that Steve Jobs way, why Waze is going to change the world. Turned out to not be Waze, turned out to be Gopher and then Web. But the basic structure, I think, is still in place. And it didn't come from me. None of this stuff is new by me.
You synthesize.
Related projects. There are related documents that all sorts of really interesting documents from that time. Catalyzing a market for wide-area information servers. That was the one of the original blurbs that came out in '88. That was the pitch to thinking machines. We need to catalyze a market, so people making money for these information servers. I wonder if I could find that. How to do searching on supercomputers that now become PCs. So CompuServe, Minitel, 16,000 information services, phenomenal success. NetLib, the Switzerland system. The only thing I've got for the web is Switzerland system. Still assessing this system. That was all I knew at that time. Switzerland system. Still assessing this system. Lotus, information brokerage companies, and hypertext. So to what was going on in the Xanadu world and the different hypertext systems that were all bouncing around at the time, help systems and the like. So this was after I got to Apple and pulled together all the companies.
Right.
And,
Wonderful.
yeah, kind of fun.
Did Tim see this?
I don't think so. Well, yeah, no, it went out with every Waze distribution. It just,
Yes.
you know, there was a few things that I thought were important to put in every Waze distribution. One was the ethics of digital librarianship. Now that lots of people are becoming librarians and they're seeing usage logs, how should they ethically deal with that responsibility? There's proposals for the payment structures, the URL structures, and sort of the idea behind what Waze was about. And that just went out with the
Yeah, I
original
recall there's an awful lot of stuff in the Waze distribution, much in the same way there's an awful lot of stuff in the Emacs distribution.
Yeah, the same sort of, you know, we got something to say, we're going to say it, gosh damn it,
A
right.
lot to say.
So that I think you might find fun, just, you know, when you're driving around or, you know, on a bus or something. I think you might find it fun.
I will.
Um,
I will.
Well, and it's interesting to see how, you know, it's true. People had thought through all of this so clearly.
Oh, decades ago.
Well, I mean, other than Ted Nelson, who really does. Jesus, I mean, he thought of it so in such a vacuum.
Yeah.
He's the real.
Oh yeah, I've got this wonderful signed copy of Computer Lib, from, you know, it's just this ancient book, with just all the hand scrolls. Ted Nelson, you know, he wrote to me when I announced the archive. He said, "Oh, another piece of Xanadu being done," but, you know, in this sort of lamenting way. And I said, "Of course, Ted. We're just fulfilling all of the things that you went and suggested so many years ago, so it should be no surprise." True. Yeah, well, this stuff is great. So good fun. So that, I think, would probably be, in terms of early stuff that might be interesting or useful to you.
And you say you did do a history of some sort, or?
I've got different history files. Most of them are at home.
Oh, okay.
Early
Yeah.
things of, but a history of Waze.
No, if you don't, you don't.
Not really. Not really. Just the different segments, like the Apple segment, the, you know, different company pieces, selling it to AOL, integrating it with AOL.
Did you ever meet any of the web crawler folks? Brian Pinkerton?
Meet them? Oh yeah. They were all in the same building.
That's right, yeah.
They moved into the Waze building in South Market.
Martin Custer.
Yeah, he came over here and he's giving us some hints on how to do the crawler for. Just for your video, you might want to just, you know, there's the robot and there's sort of going and archiving the web, which I think is somewhat interesting towards your web history. It's a different form. You're doing an anecdotal history. The idea is to be able to collect the source materials so that historians and scholars will be able to do a different kind of job than what you're doing now.
No, but you realize that they should be interconnected. In other words, ideally the anecdotal history like ours has links, rich links that lead you to all the source material. I mean, it's just another view of the source material.
Sure, I'll show you the. Bring it up. Let me bring it
Note that with all the material we're gathering, we're just
the archive. I hope he's okay with this. Hey, Mike, want to be videoed?
I don't know.
All right.
What's
So
it for?
basically a Sun machine donated by Sun that's basically
it's an ultra.
connects to several hundred web servers at any particular time, gets a page, waits 5 seconds, get another page, and just goes through all of the websites. And it's an ultra just running underneath somebody's desk that's able to basically keep a T1 busy, sucking about 1 million pages a day.
This is the ultimate robot.
That's, well, it's just like Alta Vista or Web Crawler, but we're trying to get everything, including all of the images, everything, so you can recreate the web the way it was at any particular time. So you can dial the Wayback Machine and experience what the web looked like. Not but with all the CGI scripts, and there are certain Java things, but you won't be able to do that. But you'll be able to try to use the web the way it was, or find a copy of record, or what did a particular person say at a particular time, or how can you cite a document if the documents go away every 44 days. The mean life of a document on the World Wide Web is 44
Really?
days. That's what they say based on one study. We don't have our own numbers on that yet, but it seems to be about right.
But if you're not picking up a lot of CGI stuff, I mean, most virtual documents will not happen then, right?
We'll get whatever you could get to at that time, but we don't know how to go and type anything
Right.
into a search string, right? So anything that's in a database behind, we cannot get.
So you're grabbing all this stuff down the pipe. What kind of bandwidth you have here?
T1. And we'll be bumping that up. But that's enough to give you 1 million pages a day. And if there are 50 to 100 million pages, then that's how long it'll take. And once we get better at it, we'll run it at the San Diego supercomputer site and download quicker and da-da-da-da-da. So I'll show you with the storage mechanism.
Thanks.
Oh, it's running. Oh, yeah. Excellent. So there is putting a tape away.
Can you say where you are in
And-
the process now?
We've gathered 600 gigabytes of material, and it's sitting on this robot and a robot that's down in San Diego.
And you do have a backup of,
Currently, we've got only one copy, though. Of course, as we're getting going, more and more. Why don't I stand by this thing? More and more of this thing will be backed up in multiple places for faults in terms of technology, but also political faults. I mean, the Library of Alexandria was burned. So we need to be able to preserve our digital history in multiple places under different regimes. So basically, since these things require tending, every 10 years you've got to move it forward to the next generation of technology, or it dies. So you need an organization to keep it going, and I will endow the organization with enough money to keep the bits alive forever. So any bits that are donated to the Internet Archive, I will make sure has the money for every 10 years, will keep it alive. And when it comes time to work with the National Archives or the Library of Congress so they can deal with terabytes, then we will provide a copy to them. But right now there are no institutions that are doing large-scale digital collections. And so we're, I think, the first that is starting to build the core collection that can become a digital library, at least of this type of material. And this is all it takes. This is another Sun computer donated by Sun. 20 gigabytes of hard drive space that's used as a cache. So that machine in the other room gathers web pages and puts them in a 100 megabyte chunk, transfers it to this set of disks, and after they've been here for a while, they basically get transferred to tape. And that way we can cost effectively store the whole net, which is estimated as between 1 and 10 terabytes. And that's
and growing at what rate?
we don't know. We don't know. There's estimates that it's doubling every 7 months, but frankly, we just don't know. So we have not finished the first complete crawl yet, but it's getting there.
How long has it been going?
We've gotten some donations of all the HTML from early 1996, and we'll get some donations from what one of the crawlers, OpenText, had from 1995. That'll be the earliest web we have. Our crawler has just been running for a couple weeks, but it gathers about 10 gigabytes a day. So it seems like a fair amount, but there's a lot to go.
But you're sure that that's above the rate of increase? Yeah.
No. At some point, everybody's going to have their camcorders on the internet. And at that point, we can't keep up. But right now, we think we can be comprehensive. So
That's
we
true.
had a request for some of 1992 net news. And so we've been, and that we've got from CD-ROMs on our robot. And so people come in through FTP, contact this machine. If it asks for a file that's not on disk, it's on tape, then it takes it from tape, puts it back on disk, and then serves it out over the internet. And we're building services to be able to data mine this. We don't think that this is a crypt or a time capsule. It's to create new types of services that if you had the whole net in a place where you could do active manipulation of it to find trends and new ideas in it or changes over time, then you can be a smarter organization, and that's what we're trying to build.
I don't know, through the smoke glass.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So somebody requested a file.
I like these things.
Yeah, it gives a visceral notion to how big the net is, and there's something working.
Although, the fact that this thing is smaller than most refrigerators is also an amazing feat in
Yes.
itself.
And it can store 2 terabytes, which is about 1/10 of the text in the Library of Congress
Right.
is in this box.
10 of these, and
10 of these, and you have the text in all of the books of the Library of Congress. So something very big has happened in the sense that computers now are able to manipulate all published material inexpensively in a way that can basically put computers in the library and help where you can't read every book, your computer can, to go and figure out what it is you should be reading next. I find this just amazing and exciting. I mean, you'll be able to pull off new services that never been possible before.
But do you think, though, that, I mean, we're at a funny juncture where the technology, of course, this can grapple with all paper material. 10 of these would take in a good portion of what people want. But as you say, as soon as everyone has their camcorder on the net, I mean, we're right at that funny threshold before the flood of digital information, right?
Before richer media types.
Right.
And large part the internet is got such small files because the internet's so slow.
Which
If
will
you're
keep it
trying-
honest for a while.
For a little while. But the flood of bandwidth will come, whether from cable, through wireless, through phone companies, through every which way, bandwidth will come. But text, everybody can only be typing all the time, and that is small.
Oh, yeah. Text is a fractional portion of it.
And it's a very dense representation of knowledge, so you can manipulate it. Computers can.
This will be smaller and faster.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
CERN, both CERN and NCSA, they have.
Where these things used to just be in big shops, supercomputers, cost hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars. Now you can do it in a little house in the prairie here in the Presidio. Where it took 140 million to go and build a library new library in San Francisco.
How many times could you get that library into here?
Not quite. It would take a couple of these.
Really? So it's a good sized library then.
It's a good sign. Turns out the Library of Congress isn't that much larger than the big libraries in terms of the number of volumes. Big libraries are 5-6 million books. The Library of Congress is 20 million. It just basically paper just doesn't scale.
At all.
But computers do. It's fun.
It doesn't need any special air conditioning. Oh, at CERN, they had a Cray, which they finally got rid of when they switched to linked workstations, virtual mainframes. The Cray spent its last days as a tape server. All it was doing,
Copying
serving
stuff off.
tapes from the
Well,
big
I tell you,
underground
I got a
library.
connection machine. It cost $500. That was the fastest computer in the world 10 years ago. Cost $500, and it's not worth turning on. So just imagine what terabytes are going to mean to our kids.
Yeah.
It's like, Dad, that's just a terabyte.
another terabyte around for my Nintendo.
Ultra
Yeah.
Game Boy, Ultra Game
Yes.
Boy 512.
So it's going to be a very different world.
With real
And
smell.
hopefully we actually have some of the old stuff to be able to put on it. I love that statement I wonder which one's going to be true. If it's not digital,
Yeah.
it won't be saved. There's one statement, and I read another one. If it's digital, it won't be saved.
Well, but without people doing what you're doing, clearly, the
Well, early
Just
television's
po-
lost. Early net's lost.
Brewster was saying when they switched to videotape, they just started
racing over them.
Yeah, it was an advantage, right? You could reuse the tapes. Why would you want to keep it?
Well, when we go into space, we can recapture some of them from the.
Yes, we'll have to hurry though, right? Have to go a little faster than the speed of light to be able to catch up with the old I Love Lucy's.
Yeah.
I Love Lucy was archived, but the early Tonight Show, all gone. And you say, good riddance. But Ted Turner bought the early archive, a bunch of early TV programs for $1 billion recently, I've heard. So there's some value in the stuff, and he's been doing very well by using it. But also the early stuff has got people's dreams. Like the early people that sort of say, and the early people in the web, like you doing your dinosaur exhibit, you've got this ability to be able to do something new and different. And at some point people will just say, oh, well, I can't do that. And they'll just sort of focus in on all it can do. But in the beginning, you have just amazing things. So I always kept the early logs of ways. I thought those would be the most valuable things, is what are the questions that people ask the net? And so I kept all of those logs.
Oh, you have those?
Yeah, yeah. Of just, what do people look for? What are people dreaming that the technology can finally answer? And
So
right now already the web is sort of, stagnated. People's idea of it is really focused down to sort of the stuff that the technicians have given. But it's the early dreams that is what we should be trying to live up to. And so trying to keep some of that alive.
So that was an exciting period when was it any Newton in the apple for you with Waze? When did you decide this is going to be my project rather than just a random thought?
1988 is when I decided to...
What context were you? In the bath? Driving in the
gosh,
car?
No, it wasn't a eureka. The question I had was, how do you find a field? Supercomputers, basically, by 1988, it looked like we'd come up with most of the reasonable ideas. And so it took sort of 10 years, at least from my point of view, for the phase that I'm usually involved in. I wanted to find a field that would have interesting problems to solve for 25 years, because I didn't want to have to change fields again. And the only one I could come up with was helping answer tough questions for people. And what's my bank balance? Little computers will do that. But answering the hard questions. Should I go back to graduate school? Should I marry this woman? What book should I read next? Da-da-da-da-da. Hard questions. Want to be able to help make computers answer those. That was the goal that I started with. And Waze was the first step, which was making open protocols work. Turned out to not be the Waze protocols, but that's fine. We won anyway. And thanks large part to Tim Berners-Lee. So the open protocols were necessary. Then is building an infrastructure for collection of the content and the usage of the information. That's step 2. That's what we're involved in now. Step 3 is to help answer the hard questions. Tracking people's histories so you can learn from other people's mistakes or other people's examples. And basically by having computer records of what's going on. And how other people won and lost, how their careers turned and twisted, what worked for people, what didn't. Hopefully we're building a resource that can play some of the, augment the role of mentor or priest in small towns to answer the hard questions. We're just in phase 2. So I'm just surprised that we're in the end of 1996 and this is as far as we are. We have got a long way to go. The open protocols worked, but unfortunately we screwed up some of the distributed nature of the net. And so we're trying to do step number 2 here. Then I'm going to move on before I'm, when I'm 40, then I'll start something else.
Then what are you going to do?
You don't want to know.